Dude, I had an Impossible Burger this weekend. Do you know what that is?
Oh, I heard it was really good.
It is unbelievable.
Wait, come on. Isn't it made out of
chemicals, whatever. I don't know if it's vegetarian or vegan. I think it might be vegetarian.
It's made out of people.
Maybe. It's delicious. You could, if I gave you one in a real burger, you would not be able to tell the difference.
I mean, they won an award this year, I think. Alexis was talking to me about it. So it's supposed to be amazing. It's like vegan?
I think so. It's either vegan or vegetarian. It's one of those. It might be vegan because I always see it on Twitter.
It is. Okay. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Where'd you have it?
Bear Burger, which is it's like I think they're like Northeast or New York City, but they might be like nationwide. It's like a fancy burger place.
Where in New York was it? Or
it was in New Jersey. Okay. Yeah.
I'm never gonna have it.
No, they're all over New York. The Bear Burgers, but
that's pretty cool.
You couldn't tell the difference.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like up there. It was that good.
Yeah. I mean,
you still know what you're eating.
Yeah, it was like light. I don't know how to describe it. It was like I ate it really quickly.
Okay.
But I think it's because it was like light. It wasn't as dense where I couldn't eat a burger that quickly.
Did you ever see the episode of Parks and Rec when they have the burger cook-off?
Yes. Like one of the guys makes
who's the healthy guy? Rob Lowe.
Yeah.
He like spends the entire episode curating these gourmet ingredients from organic, like whole grocery stores.
Yeah. Don't they go to
portobello mushrooms and
don't they go to a grocery store that's just like called like nuts or something?
Yeah.
Nuts
so Rob Lowe gets everything he needs over the course of the episode, and Nick Offerman, was his character's name? Ron Swanson is like following him, and he's always like, Ron, you gonna get anything? While we're at the grocery store? He's like, nope, I'm good. With his look or whatever. And he's like looking at all of like the hippies in these organic grocery stores. Finally, like right before the cook-off, they're on their way home, and Ron Swanson's like, I need to make a stop, and he's like, he just pulls over, and they pull over at this place called like it's like food and stuff. he's like looking at the camera. He's like, this is where I get all my food and other stuff I might need. And then he goes in the back to like the freezer, and he like just gets like frozen beef patties, and then he picks up like a lamp. He's like, I figured I would get a lamp while I was here, or something like that. Anyways, they go to the end and they do the cook-off. Rob Lowe has like this like brioche bun with like these like grilled portobello mushrooms and like, sauteed onions and everything. They put the burger together, and it's like Aziz and like two other characters who are the judges. And he like presents them with like plated burgers, like so great. It's like these vegan burgers or whatever. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Like Ron Swanson's going over, he like opens the grill, and he like just like grills these like patties. And then he like brings them over on like these plain buns. And he's just like, here's a burger. You can put ketchup or something on it if you want to, but you don't have to. They all take a bite, and they're like, yeah, that's way better. And then he gives it to like Rob Lowe's character. He's like, wow, that is really good.
Telling you, Rob Lowe needed the Impossible Burger.
Yeah, seriously. If he could have pulled that one off, he would have won. Oh man, Ron Swanson is so good. Such a good character. So I was like in no dependency hell a few days ago. You caught the tail end of it.
I feel like that's been a recent thing for us.
Well, yeah, it's because we're trying to make more of the stuff we work on into like add-ons, and once you do that, basically it's kind of interesting, right? Because this is like a double-edged sword of the Ember ecosystem, which is that it's easy. It's kind of, we talked about this before, the bar is so high that the expectation is that things work, and when they don't, it's like worse than if the thing was even simpler.
Mm-hmm.
So like the first time you make an add-on, you're just like, I'm going to make a component and share it and like put it into an add-on. So you do that, and then before you know it, someone's like opening issues, even though it's like the simplest add-on in the world, because they're depending on your add-on and their add-on, which is then included into a host app. So just because due to the nature of like nested dependencies, almost immediately, as soon as you make something a library like that's dependent on by other things, an add-on or even just an npm package, you need to think through this case. So I feel like there's a lot of help that could be had here, both in terms of documentation and guides, but also like guardrails in the actual APIs. So
also too, like something you've talked about before, but the test apps as a testing strategy.
So that's part of it, which is just like you get to a point where you realize I need to think through all the states that this thing can be used in, and it can be relied on in an add-on or an app, and it can be in dev dependencies or dependencies. And all four of those situations have ramifications. So you basically end up wanting these test apps, test projects in order to do this. And like I had copied my setup originally from some of Ed Faulkner's work, and this time when I came around and looked, he had gone like full-blown mono repo with all these different packages in it. So it's kind of interesting just to see how his thinking has evolved and kind of vicariously follow along with his work.
Nice.
Because I think he has done more work in this area, way more work in this area than me. I mean, he's spec'd out an entirely new like Ember CLI, what it would look like with his like embroider project. But, you know, I think he's identified a lot of the architecture things he would like to see changed in Ember CLI. And so
does that come from this, like what you're talking about, where it's there's all these different ways an add-on can be used and they all have a different output?
Basically.
And so like a build tool can help with that, like the guardrails that you're talking about.
Yes. And like he's even said, it's almost like magic that it happens to work. It's almost like the fact that it happens to work today with as few bugs as we have is kind of magic. It's kind of almost unbelievable, because so often dependencies are getting like mashed together. And this is not Ember's fault. This is ultimately due to the design of NPM, that it was designed for a server environment and it became kind of shoehorned in for front-end development. So
like to unpack that, it's because in NPM you can have nested dependencies, but when you ship a front-end app, you flatten those into something like require.
Or you don't flatten them, and then somehow they are flattened. You don't actually flatten them. That's the thing. The tooling doesn't flatten them.
What does? I mean, what something does, right? Because
overriding functions does. There's a single global environment, so that's the thing. Where in a node, you're running like, you can just think of it as like a function scope. Every module has its own like function scope, so it can just inject the dependency it needs, and you're just running like isolated functions. But when things start needing a global environment, or you can't ship 3 versions of jQuery. And so what actually happens when you have 3 dependencies that have dependencies on different versions of jQuery? The answer is kind of, I mean, I'm sure someone knows, but it's very difficult to untangle all that. So like a lot of times today, things will get overwritten. You know, we run into this where we don't even know what version of Ember Data Travis is running for our like storefront add-on.
Yeah.
And that's because you install add-on docs, which happens to depend on Ember Data, and then it bumps it to 3. We're still using 2. Maybe you have now 2 versions of Ember Data in your build.
I was going to say it's worse. It's not that we don't know which one it's running. It's we don't know if it's running A, B, or merging A and B together and running some Franken
version. Yeah, exactly. And that's why he made that comment, which is like, it's a miracle this stuff even works right now. And again, the root problem is like, so what you end up doing as an add-on author is solving problems that really should be solved at the tooling layer and that you shouldn't be having to think about. So for example, there's like 2 more issues left that I want to kind of figure out before releasing Mirage 1.0. And one of them is, they're both related to this problem. One of them is about Pretender. One of them is about Faker.js. Pretender is like an implementation detail of Mirage. 95% of people who use Mirage don't care about Pretender. It's just like an implementation detail. Then there's 5% who are like, maybe watch Pretender repository, a new version comes out, and they actually want to use some feature there. So Faker is kind of it's more likely that people care about Faker since they're using Faker in Mirage, but they're actually just accessing Faker's APIs directly. So it's come way up more often that people will request like, can you bump Faker? because like Mirage ships with a version of Faker. So these are actually like the two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, you have a dependency that's like an implementation detail of your project. On the other, you have something that's more of a peer dependency. It's like Mirage needs,
you could even argue here that it's so far on that side of the spectrum that it's not even a dependency. It's something that is commonly like always used with Mirage. And so you want to accommodate that use case.
Right. Faker would not be bundled with Mirage if Mirage were made today. And that's what I'm doing as part of 1.0. And that's because the story about getting NPM dependencies into Ember apps is so much easier today due to auto import and all the other stuff that's happened than it was 4 years ago or whatever. So, but that's kind of the way to break this down. And let's say you have the case where we're talking peer dependency. So addon docs needs Ember data to run, or else the version selector won't work. So, and maybe some other stuff that it fetches. It fetches like all the API docs are like structured JSON API data documents that are like create a build time. So like addon docs has a dependency on Ember data, but it's like a peer dependency basically. It's like it needs some version of Ember data in order to work. And it's not.
But here in this example you're using, Ember data is really an implementation detail.
Until you need to use addon docs on your storefront site, which very much cares about which version of Ember data is running. So that's the problem, is that you have to be aware that you're running in a single environment. And you can't actually have multiple versions of things.
Can I go on a quick tangent here? So you said something at the start of this conversation. You said that this forces add-on maintainers to think about the build tooling. And I ran into this with another one of our projects where I was using Ember Fetch, and Ember Fetch has some weird dependency stuff that you need to be aware of. It turned out I actually didn't need Ember Fetch. So as an add-on maintainer, I thought it was simpler. Like basically the usage, the way I was using Fetch was an implementation detail. And because
you were running into these issues.
Because I was running into these issues and because I needed to be aware of them, and I didn't need the full power of Ember Fetch. Ember Fetch does a lot of amazing things for you, and I didn't need those.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to use Ember Fetch because, hey, it's an Ember add-on and Ember Fetch exists. But it was an implementation detail. I didn't need all the goodies that it brings along. So I just installed whatwig fetch.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of my solution to this sort of thing was, like basically reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
I would love to use Ember Fetch because it's awesome, but
it was
because
causing problems.
It's reinvent the wheel. So I guess my question here is like, would one approach be to say like, look, I would love to use Ember data, but I end up pushing up all these issues to add-ons that need a specific version of Ember data. So therefore I'm going to implement my own
you're going to use something else.
Live.
But then what about the other 10 dependencies we use in addon docs? Like that's the whole point of the productivity of the ecosystem, is that I can use Power Select, I can use Ember Concurrency, I can use Ember Animated. And if I'm ever in a situation where someone else is,
that's
a thing.
That's a very fair point that you want to use Ember data because it's the easiest low friction. I want to use Ember Fetch because it's the easiest low friction way. I should just be able to use it. I mean,
there's all these tools that exist for Ember data already. Like there's already a docs parser that put it into JSON API documents ready to fetch. Like we fetch that data. Like you request your API docs and all that stuff. You benefit from Ember data's identity map when you're navigating around the app. You're not reloading data. All that stuff that you want.
I guess
it's an Ember app,
right? Yeah, absolutely. I guess this is like the trade-off is that you. That's not zero cost.
It should be though. I mean, that's the thing.
Theoretically,
there's no reason why. Yeah, and so in the theoretical approach that you would want in an ideal world is to say, add-on docs. In this case, it's very valid for someone to care about the version of Ember data that their documentation. Oh, look, we just triggered Siri. I wonder what we said that Siri thought. She's just like, I haven't captured data in Unit recently, so.
Oh boy.
Hey, it's not an Ember app, so you can't blame us. Ember data is very much likely to be something that add-on authors care about the version of, for instance, the storefront case. So in that case, when I'm working on add-on docs, ideally you would want to be able to say, Ember data is a peer dependency, that Ember data needs to be present for add-on docs to run. And now ideally you would say like, so let's say I work with Ember data 2 when you first start this thing. And so now you are creating a new add-on, you install add-on docs, and you only care about add-on docs. So because you haven't specified your own version of Ember data, add-on docs during the yarn install or npm install phase is going to say, okay, I need Ember data version 2. I don't have one, so I'm just going to pull one down. So that should work. Then you have a situation where the add-on's like, all right, now maybe that add-on doesn't even know add-on docs is using Ember data. It shouldn't, right? Because it is a detail. But it's a peer dependency. And so let's say they say, all right, now I'm going to install Ember data version 3 to do something. At this point, you'd want ideally the tooling layer to fail, to say there's an unmet peer dependency and I'm refusing to just give 2 versions of Ember data because we're in front end land and that's not feasible. So ideally you would want at the npm install or yarn install layer at this point in the process to say, you have to figure this out. So either you have to go to add-on docs, file an issue and say, can you update your version to make it work with Ember data 3? If it works with Ember data 3, add-on docs can be more lenient in what it specifies its peer dependency is. It can say I can work with any version of Ember data 2 or 3. And that's a good thing because it's a general purpose add-on that's meant to work with a lot of things. So you would want that to happen, even if you could snap your fingers and have ideal everything. Because the alternative is for them to lock to a very specific version and for consumers not to be able to basically deduplicate the version of Ember data which you want.
Yep.
So that's ideal. It turns out today, if you were to do this, well, first of all, peer dependencies is not even really enforced in the tooling layer. It's kind of like we'll issue a warning if some peer dependency is not met, but it actually is not enforced by anything in the large. Like individual projects can fail a build if they don't have a peer dependency met, but it's up to them. So it's not actually like embedded in the tooling.
And you don't, importantly here, you don't get it at the yarn install step.
Correct.
You get it at the Ember build step.
Right, exactly.
Which is, it's late.
And most people don't do that. Like if you think about it, in theory, every Ember add-on has a peer dependency on Ember source.
Yep.
But no one does that.
Yep.
And so if one add-on started doing that, it wouldn't be very helpful. So what you're left with is like dependencies. Really, add-on docs has a dependency on Ember data. And so it's going to specify something, and maybe it specifies it liberally. So it has a liberal constraint, and it says it works with Ember data 2 or 3. So let's say your project storefront also pulls in Ember data as like a dev dependency for its add-on docs site, and it specifies Ember data 2. So you would think, in this case, running yarn install or npm install would say, storefront, you need Ember data 2. Add-on docs, you need Ember data 2 or 3. All right, that's great. We can do 2 and satisfy both, but it doesn't do that.
Yeah, not only would you think that, but I PR'd this to add-on docs for this very reason, thinking that this would solve all my problems and ending up trolling myself.
So it basically pulls in 2 versions or something because it says, oh, the latest version of add-on docs that Ember data the add-on docs wants is 3, so we're going to do 3. And then, but that doesn't satisfy storefront's dependency, so we're going to pull in 2, and now you have like duplicates, and this is where you end up with like tons of weird bugs because it ends up relying on like the load order in which these things are like transformed by require.js and actually pulled into the global like scope in the browser. So it's just like a disaster. It's just like a disaster.
Now, one solution here is that, and caveat, you have to be using Yarn, but if you're using Yarn, you can add a resolution. So you can say that for any Ember data that I install, and storefront can add a resolution that says for any Ember data I install, no matter who installs it, make sure they install 2.
Yeah, but you don't want to have to do that for every single dependency in your package JSON. So the question is, how do you know when that kind of issue comes up? And the answer to that is dependency lint is the best tool we have. So Ember CLI dependency lint will check your graph after a yarn install or an npm install, and it'll tell you, hey, we have 2 versions of Ember data. One is 3, and the reason we have that is because of add-on docs. One is 2. The reason we have that is because of storefront.
And that's exactly what you're describing. Exactly what I ran into, is that I thought I had fixed this by doing 2 or 3, but then when I added the dependency lint test, it was failing, and it said, hey, look, there's a nested 3 under add-on docs, and that could be. It's not that like is being included. It says that is in your graph.
Yeah.
So it could be included.
Yeah.
So therefore, dependency lint has to fail.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yes.
Great. It's a great, actually.
Yes. Yeah. There's times where that thing does kind of work as you expect, but basically it's like inconsistent and unpredictable. So you want dependency lint. And that's just like an escape hatch where the host app can just say, yep, no matter what. It's kind of like you said. And, this would even work if add-on docs had a strict dependency of only 3. So if it had only 3 that it would actually work with based on its declared version, and storefront said only 2, so there's not even overlap anymore, I think resolutions would still let you say, I definitely want 2, and I'm just going to hope it works. So the 2 or 3 thing is still a good way for maintainers to communicate which versions that their project should work with, and they can also test both versions with using Ember Try.
Yep.
So it's still a step closer in the right direction, but again, you want this enforceable and solvable at the tooling level. But to be a best citizen, you can. Add-on docs should have 2 or 3, so it's very clear what this works with, even if like dependency lint's going to complain because Yarn's not respecting that. And add-on docs should still have tests for both 2 and 3 because they are stating publicly that they support it.
Do you think, I haven't really thought about this, so it's just coming off the top of my head, but do you think there's an answer where it's like, we rely on Ember CLI to build our app? Could there be some layer that so basically
that lets us move ahead of?
Yeah, we're not going to rely exactly. We're not going to rely on.
Yeah, I think that's part of what Ed's thinking was with the embroider stuff, which is we can do a better job of like identifying the dependencies and pulling them together and stuff. So right now I think based on the way Ember CLI kind of grew over time and used the module loading tools that it had available when it was developed, that's where a lot of the required JS kind of naive concatenation strategy, all this kind of stuff is what helps contribute to the problem, I think. And so if you were to redesign it today using like ES6 imports, I guess I don't know if that would actually help, if that's part of the solution. But I just think based on things like static import syntax that we have, tools like Webpack that we have, I think a lot of this could be solved. A layer, like you were saying, a layer above NPM and Yarn.
Yeah, I think someone correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is you can have 2 Ember datas in your node modules, but then when you start building the require map, when you start building the require map, you'll have 2 modules with the same name, and that code will just be merged, and it's like whose ever entry point was the last one in, you just hope you're going to get all their stuff, but you could still require something if you knew the path to like the older version,
right?
And it's just
right. It's also just interesting and kind of weird to me, like just doesn't seem like a good state that we're in. You've got all the Node ecosystem still using CommonJS modules, and I'm not like a Node developer, so I'm kind of speaking outside of my level of expertise now. The only Node hacking I've done is with like Ember add-ons and stuff, but the Node ecosystem is still using CommonJS modules and doesn't seem like they have any interest in not anymore. I'm not exactly I don't understand all sides of that debate, but there's like this .mjs and there's ES6 modules that we use in the front end now. But it's not like everyone is like rushing towards ES6 modules.
No, and when I work on fast boot stuff, I use the CommonJS. It just works, and I just want something that works.
I mean, maybe that's the answer why, is that like there's a lot of Node packages that are CommonJS. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear. But it just seems like we're in a bad state where Node ecosystem has no real interest in moving ES6 modules, and yet the entire front-end JavaScript world has decided to use Node and basically Node modules as a way to manage their dependencies. And all of these problems that again, you would expect to be solved at the tooling layer are left up to all the different communities and all the different build tools. And yeah, I don't think the architecture of NPM is what anyone would do if they were solving this problem head on from the beginning. So it's not a criticism of how it was designed. It's just the constraints of the front end weren't present during the initial design and during all the evolution. It's not the primary focus. So you would expect this kind of thing where it's not perfectly suitable for it. It's completely understandable. But at the same time, the question is like, so what's the path forward?
I'm kind of interested to if you use Webpack or like Parcel, are you scratching your head as much as we are about this stuff? Or is it, the answer could be that like this stuff is really complicated and there's tons of old code and there's tons of new code and this stuff might change in the future. And therefore it's up to the build tools to resolve,
paper over it and solve their specific use case.
Yeah.
But
I agree. By the way, I agree with you. I think it's a bad state. And just kind of like, the last couple add-ons that I've worked on, I've like been banging my head against the desk with this stuff. And it's not clear what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's not.
So it's a lot different than like, okay, I need to write these like 50 test cases and get the API. Like that's like, you can envision yourself there. But when you hit these dependency bugs, it's just like, you got to go talk to people.
And people sometimes say different things, which is also, I find frustrating. I actually just remembered like we had this note about this node bug in Mirage. So I had like the faker thing and I had the pretender thing. Question is like someone wants to override pretender. How can I make it so that works? And so right now we have what we just talked about, which is like I specify faker as a dependency. Maybe I have 2. Pretender 3 comes out. Now if I'm using auto import, right, so to pull it back, there's this technique that Ember jQuery uses to import jQuery. And it specifies a default version, but it looks in the host app's node modules. So you're a host application, you depend on Ember jQuery, but you also like install jQuery 3.4 at the top level because you really care about that. Ember jQuery is actually going to do some peeking around before it calls app.import and make sure that it only imports a single version. But that's like just clever code hackery that is doing within the add-on. Again, this is not something that's like generally respected at the tooling layer or across the ecosystem. It's just like they're trying to be as helpful as possible, but it's like a one-off solution.
Yeah, and could you dependency lint this? Because if you did do something like this, wouldn't you still have 2 jQueries in your graph?
I think you might actually, but it doesn't actually matter because those only one would be
only one gets imported, right?
But yes, I do think. I do think so.
The trickery that's
right. That is the point. It's like hidden.
So if you did like yarn y or dependency lint, you might
be confused.
Yeah,
that'd be a good test. So I was looking at this code and I was going to do it in Mirage, where Mirage was going to be more intelligent about how it brings in Pretender, and I was going to say, all right, if the host app has Pretender installed, use that. Otherwise, use my thing. And so I started down this path and then I ran into some issues. And anyways, the conclusion is like Ed was basically saying if you remove some of the custom app.import stuff that you had from the old days, you install Ember Auto Import as a dependency of Mirage and you just install Pretender, but you use it with Auto Import. If someone else installs Mirage and then also installs Pretender, Auto Import is going to actually do its best to dedupe, and you have a good chance that the host app is going to end up with it, the right version.
That's super cool. So Auto Import can be like, okay, I see you have 2 Pretenders, but one is top level, and I'm going to, when someone imports Pretender, I'm going to prefer the top level one.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he said, but he also said like a good chance.
He also said it's magical that any of this stuff works in your...
So, yeah, so I think that's what I'm going to go for, because his kind of point was even if doing this one-off code to solve the specific use case would be kind of helpful in the small, there's nothing special about Pretender in this case. Mirage has let's say it has 15 dependencies. What's happening to the other 15 if they happen to be installed also by the host app? Ember CLI, Ember source. This is like a general problem. There's nothing special in this case. So this question will continue to come up. And so the bug that happened was someone opened up a issue saying you depend, like Mirage depends on, I can pull it up, but it was like you depend on JS DOM, let's say, or some package. I think it was like, it might have been Ember Lodash. You depend on Ember Lodash, and oh wow, it's like all the Apple things today. It's frozen now. That's kind of interesting. I've never seen that happen before. Maybe it's confused because I'm talking on the podcast. It's like, I know how to recognize Sam, but Sam on podcast doesn't look anything like Sam.
Podcast Sam.
Podcast Sam. I have to add that to my Face ID list. So he was like, this person opened an issue, and they were like, when my colleague installed and did the log file for this app, when they installed this app, Ember Lodash was version X. Now it's version this. So what had happened was Ember Lodash had bumped minor version. So it was, based on the tooling, safe to upgrade. So later in time, when they ran yarn install on this new machine, the dependency resolution pulled in a new version of Ember Lodash that was still Semver compatible with what Mirage had, or what, whatever it was. And that can happen, right? But it actually broke things because Ember Lodash had bumped in a way that made it not work with older versions of Ember, and they were on like Ember, let's say like 2.2 or something like that.
I see.
So then we had this conversation on this thread in Mirage, which was like, oh, Ember Lodash should have actually bumped its major version because it bumped one of its dependencies that started breaking older versions of Ember apps. But then it was like, but didn't Mirage do the same? Like Mirage is actually in the same boat where one of its dependencies changes and breaks an older app. So isn't that a breaking change for Mirage? Like when I upgraded Mirage and like bumped all of its dependencies. So then it's like you get in this weird spot where
you could make that statement about anything that depended on Ember Lodash.
You could make that statement about a patch version that gets updated and happens to break something. So if someone violates Semver in some way, it can have like cascading effects in a really crazy way. So this is like, all of this is super complicated, but like we went back and forth, and ultimately it was like, if Mirage has a test suite coverage for like all these old versions of Ember, it shouldn't matter.
You do?
Because I do.
So why didn't your test suite fail?
It actually might not be testing this particular version of Ember because it was like end of life. It was like 2.1 or 2.2 or something like that, which I think is like, what, 3 or 4 years old or something like that?
Yeah, I actually, that is a good question. Is the answer here that this, I don't agree with this. I think this is a bad answer, but is the answer that, sorry, I can't help you. You're opening a bug about something that's end of life.
Yeah. So yeah, it was Lodash. Our project relies on Mirage locked to 04, which has a dependency of Ember Lodash 4.17.3. My coworker built a while ago, so npm install pulled in Mirage with Ember Lodash version 4.18. Building today, npm install pulled the same version of Mirage, but with Ember Lodash 4.19.4 instead, which itself pulled another dependency that is incompatible with Ember 2.11, requiring 2.13. So the topic was like, you should consider locking down all of your dependencies in your project to like xx.yy.zz without any caret, because
in your project,
in like
or in
Mirage,
your add-on?
in Mirage, so that someone who depends on Mirage doesn't have this happen to them. But then we kind of talked through why that's not.
Yeah, that doesn't seem okay.
But it is confusing how that can happen. So the reason I brought all this up is because one of the points I wanted to make on this episode, which I think is one of the key takeaways, especially in today's environment, but it's actually also true in environments that are more stable, like the Ruby environment, which is basically, the easiest way to say it is, you want lenient dependencies for libraries and add-ons and strict dependencies for apps.
Yes.
So you want to be as liberal as possible. That goes back to the example where add-on doc says, I want to work with as many versions of Ember data as possible. When it comes to an application, you're not reusing it in different versions of anything. You actually just want reproducible builds. And so this is where the log files come from. And there's a lot of people who are still not using log files, but basically log files the answer, the way to solve this problem.
I think it might be Yehuda, but I think in the Ruby days, there was a blog post, and it might have been by Yehuda, that said something like, when you're building an app, use a log file. When you're building an add-on or a gem, don't use a lock file.
And it's a little different in our case where you still actually want a lock file for like something like Mirage. It's just not going to be used during the install process from the host app's perspective. But the lock file for a project like a Mirage.
So you can get reproducible dev environment.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it's interesting. I mean, Ed's had some interesting comments where he said, I was kind of like complaining about this in like 3 different repos, and he was like answering me. I was just like following him around GitHub, bothering him about this. And he said that, you know, even if the tooling worked, it actually is more of a cultural problem, is kind of one of the first things he said, which was interesting.
Can you explain that? Can you explain that?
I think it was about breaking changes, semver, and also specifying dependencies liberally so that the tooling layer can actually piece together a graph and deduplicate things properly. He was saying even if the tooling would do that, today it wouldn't just start solving all the problems immediately because no one's been thinking about that.
We're not liberal enough.
Exactly. When I install Lodash, I just install Lodash because I need it. I don't think, oh, like my add-on is going to be used in an application which very recently could install Lodash. So I need to think about when I first use this one API from Lodash, what are all the supported versions of it and how many versions can I support?
That's a great point because when I use an add-on in my add-on, it's Ember install other add-on, and then I never change the package JSON.
Exactly. So what would that look like for you to have to think about that more?
Well, with the Ember data case, it's you know, I usually know. So I'm building an add-on that uses Ember data. I would Ember install Ember data. Let's say it had it was using Ember data as an actual dependency. I would Ember install Ember data, move it from dev dependencies to dependencies, and then just say, okay, based on my experience with Ember data, I know this should work in most versions of 2 and 3, so it would be 2 or 3. But by default, it would just be 3.7.1 or whatever.
Right.
And I would leave it like that.
Yep.
And I'd be like, yeah, it's got a caret.
Yep. But you could totally, so what he was saying was like, when you start doing this, you can, you know, a lot of the tooling that we have in the Ember ecosystem helps here because let's say you say, yeah, I work with Ember data 2 or 3. Now just add a scenario to your Ember try with the oldest version that you support. And then the default stuff will work with the rest because the default will, like the floating dependencies version of the test will always do like the most recent version. So there you're kind of covering the range. Not truly.
You bookend it.
Yeah, you bookend it. Exactly. That would be like a sensible, sane first pass approach.
That's interesting. So then should my Ember try scenarios be more? Should I be consciously thinking about, usually I'm just like, okay, what are all the LTS versions and let me get those covered. But should I be thinking about like, what is the oldest version and how can I get like the matrix of different Ember data, the oldest Ember data with the oldest Ember CLI with the oldest Ember source.
Right. I'm not sure. I think again, I just try to follow the leaders in this area. Ed, I look at the Simple Labs folks a lot because they're very diligent about their maintenance and keeping things working and firing on all cylinders and updated and everything. So, but in terms of like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's a clear answer here. I think it's true that like add-on docs could write its automated test suite, have it run against Ember Data 2 and Ember Data 3, and that would be better for the community. And I think maybe we do that or we should do that. But again, this is like, it's just one piece of it. It's not solving the problem in a general way. So I think more thought needs to go into the general solution. It's tricky. So I think that's one lesson, though. That's definitely a good lesson for people to understand that their apps should absolutely have log files. That is one way to achieve this principle that apps should have specific stringent dependencies. And libraries should have liberal dependencies, which could mean a variety of things. It could mean like being cognizant of not using APIs that you know are very specific because especially if people installing your library are going to likely be depending on that project. Something like a Lodash, if Lodash comes out and you're using like the cutting edge feature, just think about that, because now if anyone else is using Lodash, like, you could have issues. The dependencies chain thing with Ember CLI dependency lint and yarn resolutions is a good solution today. It's an escape hash that you need to know about if you're developing apps or add-ons, because it's important. Dependency lint, I don't know if it's a default install, but
it's not. But I think
they've talked about it.
For an application, I think you should install dependency lint, even if you don't configure it or you allow everything to go through. I think it's a good thing to have.
And it's weird because it's weird because you start pinning down versions of dependencies, and 6 months later, you look in that thing and you're like, oh yeah, we have a resolution of, Ember CLI clipboard 0.7.0. And it's like, well, that's weird. I wonder why that is. And then you're trying to upgrade things. Now, if you upgrade things and you remove that and you no longer have a dependency lint issue and your test passed, then that's pretty good. Yeah. So that's still a path forward there. But it does feel a little strange sometimes. But it's still better to know than to be in a situation where you're actually using two versions of a library that have been merged together.
Mm-hmm. And the whole idea here is that, like you said, apps should be strict about their dependencies, and this is a great way to enforce that.
Exactly. Enforcing it is what this whole discussion is basically about. And then as far as add-ons go, by default, putting things in dependencies, dev dependencies don't matter. Dev dependencies aren't pulled in when a host app installs your add-on and runs yarn install. The dependencies are, though, and that's where all this deduplication stuff happens and where you run into problems. Dependencies and auto import, Ed said is his kind of today, his best approach for a lot of this stuff, because it's a general problem that anything you put in dependencies could be installed by the host app. Now, if you have something that is very likely to be needed by the host app, the kind of dependencies approach and crossing your fingers might not be the best thing. And you want something more like peer dependencies that would be enforceable if the tooling did it. And because the tooling doesn't do it today, it's going to be up to you, but it still might be better. And the way you can do this is with add add-ons to project.
It's like add packages to JSON or something.
Add packages to project or add package to project.
That sounds right.
So this is an Ember CLI API that you can use in the default blueprint of your add-on. So let me think of a good example of this. Would be like Ember CLI SaaS. Ember CLI SaaS requires on an implementation of SaaS. And they could require SaaS and put it in their dependencies. So when you install Ember CLI SaaS, that's all you care about. And you get SaaS as a nested dependency, sometimes what's called a transitive dependency. It's not actually the top level dependency of your app. It's just a transitive dependency, but you depend on it through Ember CLI SaaS. That's like the implementation detail perspective, where SaaS is just an implementation detail. But it turns out it's not really, where lots of people reasonably want control over their SaaS implementation. They want to use Node SaaS. They want to use like Dart SaaS.
Yeah.
They want to change the versions.
We ran into this problem where Node SaaS, we were building on a Windows computer that didn't support Node SaaS. And we went to upgrade Ember CLI SaaS, and they had us do this. They had us pull in our own SaaS implementation. We could use Dart SaaS.
And that's powerful. It's good.
Yeah. And I actually think we used a version of Node SaaS that did build on Windows. It was awesome, right? Mm-hmm. The path there. So that's great.
So that's the example of a peer dependency. So just to finish this, what's happening is, unless your thing is about this.
It's about this.
Okay, go ahead.
So does Tailwind fall into this category?
Well, here, let's finish with the SaaS thing, just to finish the story. So because the implementation of SaaS is relevant for the host app, when you install Ember CLI SaaS, you don't just get Ember CLI SaaS in your package.json file, right? You actually will see two entries, and one will be the default SaaS implementation. And it does so with this API addPackagesToProject that runs on the default blueprint. And that's basically pushing the responsibility onto the host app and saying, we need this to run. And you can imagine there's probably some code in Ember CLI SaaS that's like, if you don't tell me which implementation to use and I don't find the default, I'm going to just fail the build. And that's basically their way of like hacking peer dependencies. Again, you would hope would wish, snap your fingers, that they could just say, I need like something that implements Sass as a peer dependency. And I don't know. It's pretty tough.
I need a Sassable.
Right. Exactly.
Now, is there a downside here where that now in the host app, you have these two dependencies. They're really related to each other, but they're two separate entries in the host app.
It is a problem.
And they could drift. And
you don't even know that. There's nothing even, it's not even clear. I mean, Git blame, honestly, is the best tool you have to see why this thing is included in the first place. And it's also a problem where like you can upgrade Ember CLI Sass and not rerun the blueprint, which is the only thing that is even telling you this thing is like a peer dependency. Now, Ember CLI Sass could list Sass as a peer dependency. And if you were to remove it for some reason, someone comes along and says, oh, we don't need Sass. We have Ember CLI Sass. Let's just remove it. Then when you run Ember Serve or yarn install or whatever, yarn install, you would get like a warning that says so-and-so has an unmet peer dependency. But like I think I have 3 of those in some project I'm working on. I just ignore them.
Also too, like there's a whole bunch of warnings that just show up with Ember. There's like now warnings for circular dependencies. There's there's a thing about Babel deprecations. So
it's
not
very
enforced. Easy. It's very easy to ignore.
Yeah, it's not enforced. So that's pretty tough. So yeah, it's not good. It's not ideal. It's not how someone would design it if they were designing it from scratch to actually solve these problems for real.
It's almost like you want in the host app's package JSON a way to represent a transitive dependency. Mm-hmm. So you have like Ember CLI Sass : its version, and then under it it's like Ember, or not Ember, just regular Sass. So it's clear that these two things are related.
But what if you have another thing that depends on Sass?
Yeah. It would do like the same thing, and there'd be some resolution algorithm.
Yeah. There's not a rich enough way to express the dependencies yet in the relationships between them. It's a tough problem. I'm not sure. And again, I think this is a bigger problem in JavaScript because of the like small standard library of JavaScript. So you end up with many versions of things like left pad in a project, or Lodash or whatever, because the standard library is small. Also the cultural thing. It's like also the way NPM was designed for the server means like no one has to think about this from the beginning. Yep. So no one is thinking about it. So you end up with tons of versions of things. Some version not, JavaScript is not strongly typed or strictly typed or whatever the right one is. And so you can't enforce this. You can't enforce Ember. Ember is just conventional. It's just cultural. And if someone doesn't follow it, then you run into this issue. I think all these things contribute to this problem.
Yeah. Hearing you talk through all these, and I would be attracted to a build tool that said, okay, we know these are problems, and we've
actually thought about them.
We've built on top of this, and we've hidden this from you, and we give you feedback.
Yeah.
You, library author, we're giving you feedback when you do something that could be
right.
I don't know what that looks like, but that's something that would attract me.
Yeah.
To like locking into.
It would show you that the person has actually experienced these problems and has dealt with them, and has thought through them.
Yeah.
Whereas the current stuff doesn't. I mean, Yarn was very helpful with reproducible build from a lock file, with caching. It's faster. There's a lot of problems it did solve for sure that make front-end developers' lives easier, but there's a lot of stuff still that's lacking. Lots of things. I was going to say something. I can't remember what it was.
Well, I want to talk about. So you just gave the Node Sass example.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Tailwind.
Tailwind. So does should if you were building Tailwind today, would you follow that Node Sass, not Node Ember CLI Sass?
Yeah.
Example where you would like add
basically
Tailwind
you
to
say like
JSON?
The host app is responsible for Tailwind, and ideally Ember CLI Tailwind works with like Tailwind version 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, and I'm just doing things that are helpful to you, but you can actually upgrade, because it's happened already like 4 times. People have been like, can we upgrade the version of Tailwind for Ember CLI Tailwind? So it's just, there needs to be better answers to these questions.
Yeah,
there's totally viable reasons to like provide wrappers to libraries to within Ember ecosystem, but at the same time you like immediately run into this issue. So it's really tricky.
That's interesting. So is this problem worse
Like whatever
when
Ember
you're
Fetch
wrapping
does.
when you're wrapping a library?
I mean, I think so because
ultimately the user is interested in
the underlying
the
thing.
underlying
and we've
thing,
talked about
but they
this
want
first.
the convenience
Yeah,
of
exactly.
the Ember thing.
Exactly. Like who knows what Ember Fetch does? A bunch of stuff you don't want to have to do again, right?
Yeah,
you just want to import Fetch.
Yeah,
and
it
use
does a lot of amazing stuff. It
Yeah.
does the run loop stuff
Yeah,
for
exactly.
the tests. It sets up an initializer.
So that's great. It's great
Yeah.
to be able to share that stuff.
Yes. And the fact that it's called Ember Fetch,
Yeah.
I just see that and I'm like, okay, great. This is going to let me use Fetch in an Ember app,
Yep.
and that's what I need. And boom, I get
Exactly.
it. It's working.
Exactly. So we want that, but we also want some good way for those authors, those maintainers to tell their users how to go about changing the versions of Fetch or whatever the thing is, $dependency, $library, when it changes, and inevitably you want something that we don't have. And then B, just patterns for handling that, and like, yeah, just what's the best practices there, what can be enforced, what can be helpful and useful.
Yeah. So can I add like a new type of dependency to NPM called like wrapped dependencies?
Yeah.
And these are like the things that the
Ember jQuery.
Yeah. It would be like jQuery is a wrap dependency from Ember jQuery.
Yeah. Rails power select or Rails select 2 or whatever that thing was back in the day. I mean, Rails do this all the time, right? Because you just want to like gem install Rails select 2. Wasn't it called select 2? That like really nice drop down.
The drop down. Yeah. Yep.
So I think this is going to continue to be a problem. I think auto import's awesome because it basically, if you just need moment, you do it. But like, what does Ember moment do? That'd be a good question.
So with auto import, you lose the ability to like wrap the thing and then add your own thing. So like if you couldn't auto import fetch because you want Ember Fetch to wrap Fetch with its run loop test waiter stuff.
I think Ember Fetch could auto import Fetch, and then therefore if Ember Fetch has its version but your host app has its version, Ember Auto Import can then first look and dedupe and provide the one that the host app specified to Ember Fetch.
I see. Okay. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what Ember Fetch does. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not sure what it does under the hood.
But I think that's what he was saying would happen in Mirage. When Mirage imports Pretender, it's going to get the right one, even if the host app specifies its own version. But it's still like, yeah, who really knows? You know?
Nice.
What time are we at, Captain?
We're at 57.
Just so everyone knows, it's 16 degrees in New York right now. Sam has been sick for 2.5 weeks.
Dude, it was 4 degrees last night.
4?
4.
Well, my sister lives in Minnesota, and it was negative 28 with a wind chill feeling like negative 55. Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah.
They brought out like a pot of like boiling water and threw it into the air, and it turned into like snow, or maybe just water. And you like took it off and threw it, and it was snow by the time you could even see it coming off the edge of the pot, and then it just like covered him.
Hey, I have a question about this. So every time someone tells a story like this, it's always, oh, we took a pot of boiling water and threw it into the air.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it have to be boiling water? Why couldn't you just use regular water?
I think it would freeze by the time as you walked out of there, maybe.
No, but it's a pot of it. I feel like the boiling water, you're throwing boiling water into the air. You're just like, it's like, what could go wrong? Why does it need to be boiling? Like and people post it on YouTube. No one's like, hey, I can tell that water's not boiling. This like.
It's negative 55 degrees. I think if it was normal water, as soon as you open the door and walk out.
No, because then like you would let your dog outside and it would just freeze.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I have no desire to experience negative 55 degrees. So as much complaining as everyone's doing in New York right now, we should count our blessings that
it's even not in the Midwest. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to Adam this morning, and it's not even negative 28 in freaking Canada. Minnesota's ridiculous.
Oh man.
F that.
Yeah.
I'm going to Miami next week. So that's where I'm going to be. Sam's going to be in Miami. And I'm not going to be sitting here in 14-degree weather. I'm going to be on the beach.
Nice.
Should be a good time. So, yeah. Did you have a follow-up final question?
No, but I feel like that was a very defeating episode. I feel like we got to the end.
It has to do with the weather and the daylight. That's why I was explaining that, because we got to the end.
But we got to the end, and it's just like, oh, okay, so what should we do? And it's just like, this is just the way it is.
Well, part of the reason I want to talk about it is because in case anyone has thoughts on this, I want to make a video about this. And when I do videos like this, I like to try to solicit as much input from the community as possible. So anyone who happens to see our video is seeing like latest best practices, just like we did with the upgrade video. Like I learned a lot after we talked about that. So again, based on what Ed said, and he was talking with Tobias too a little bit, but his perspective was either do the dependencies route with auto import and forget about it. Because I was starting to write all this code for Mirage about like make sure you only import one version of Pretender. And I had like this whole test app set up, which overrode it. And I was going to write tests for it. And he's like, this is a general problem. So you can write this code for Pretender, but like, what about all the other dependencies and all of your add-ons? It's just a general problem. So you could do that. You could write that code in those tests, and it might solve this specific use case, but like it's not solving the problem generally, and you're still going to run a problem. So he said, for now, I would just use dependencies key and package.json auto import and forget about it. And if you run in a situation with the Tailwind thing, then use the addPackagesToProject, and you can specify it as a peer dependency if you want to, so that people will see a message when you yarn install, but just know that it's not enforceable. But you can actually code Ember CLI Tailwind in such a way that it will break the build if it does not find Tailwind in the build.
This is one of the things we have to do for fast boot testing, where you can install fast boot testing without fast boot. And that doesn't really make sense. Why would you do that? Yeah. But we need to do that build time check.
I wonder if we could write an add-on that those add-ons depend on, and they check peer dependencies, and it's just it's just an add-on that you install that breaks the build if a peer dependency is not found.
And you get like a declarative interface for it.
You don't even need it. You already have peer dependencies.
Oh, you would use peer dependencies.
Yeah. That seems pretty easy. That seems like not a bad approach. It wouldn't be that hard, I don't think.
I feel like nothing about this would be easy.
I have some secret code based on all of my spelunking that I can dig up. So we have to goad Ed into doing this.
Yeah, well,
he always is like, he can't turn down a challenge. So maybe we should say, scratch that. You're right, Ryan. It would be so hard. I actually bet no one could do it.
Especially if their name is Ed.
Yeah.
He does do this in Prember, because I'm going to copy that code for the fast boot testing stuff. So maybe there is an abstraction.
He can even add it to auto import, since more and more people are depending on it. And he already has a lot of infrastructure there for like testing this kind of stuff with like all these different things. So maybe if you auto import a peer dependency, it's going to break the build if it doesn't have it. Maybe that's the easiest way forward, and everyone just use auto import, which people are already using it because it solves a real problem. It's very easy.
Hey, I like that. I have a just random thing. Does like Yarn have like the ability for like plugins? Like, could you do this at the Yarn layer?
But then the users would have to have like a Yarn plugin installed for this to work.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about auto import is it's at the Ember build layer.
Yeah, it's in most Ember apps.
Well, it doesn't matter. You wouldn't need it. Ember CLI Tailwind would depend on auto import and use that when importing Tailwind.
So, okay, that's how you would get that.
Boom.
Okay, yep, gotcha.
So, yeah, that would be very helpful. I already said I owe Ed like 5 beers, so I'll just owe him 10 by the time I see him at EmberConf.
Can we end this episode on like, can you just tell a happy story or like a positive note? I
was trying to think about what was on The Bachelor this week, but again, I'm not a fan really of The Bachelor, so the specific Bachelor.
You like previous Bachelors though?
I actually haven't watched it a lot, but it's just like, it's the opposite of programming. If your brain is tired at the end of the day and you turn on Bachelor, it's not much more to.
That's it.
No, yeah, your brain is just basically brain activity has gone flatlined.
Nice.
Positive note. I mean, positive note is again, I made a lot of progress with the Mirage and add-on doc stuff. Maybe a teaser for next time is we can talk about a really cool idea that we have that we're still testing out. But I wanted to bring Mirage's blog back to the addon doc site. Well, I actually did. And I just copied over the old Jekyll posts. And I then wanted to bring comments back because I just like that. And as an add-on maintainer, it's nice to have a dedicated place for it. And I kind of spent a long time looking at all these different solutions where I was looking at Dan Abramov's new blog because the design is so great. He's an awesome, fantastic writer. And he doesn't have comments. He actually just has like a discuss on Twitter button at the bottom, which just links to a Twitter search with the URL of the post. So you can actually see every tweet that mentions the URL. Now, he has a large Twitter following, so it makes sense. It's easy to find like a lively discussion on Twitter about every one of his posts. For people who are just doing an add-on where they want a nice place to get some feedback from their users, now GitHub is obviously great for this. Issues is great. People use issues for this kind of stuff, but it's very nice to have something on your add-on doc site. It would be nice where you can have kind of featured things, like even if they were featured GitHub issues, and you could have some discussion about them. So, I used to use Discuss on Mirage's site, and so I had Discuss comments, and Discuss doesn't let you customize its rendering. So now as I was reporting this to the new site, that was like a showstopper for me because I just want like a renderless, headless commenting system. And it just looks so ugly, and it's just like tries to pull you to these different, has like weird calls to action. And I'm trying to think of a solution that works for Mirage, but also could be generalized to like every add-on doc site because that's part of the fun of all this. So we talked through a couple different ideas, and right now what I'm experimenting with is using GitHub issues, not only for the comments, which was the original idea, but also for the blog post. So this is a really cool thing. And it seems to be working out, and it's cool because it would work for basically every add-on, because every add-on is in a GitHub repo and every public add-on and has issues already. So if you think about add-on doc site being a static site and the issues being the dynamic data that's provided by GitHub, there's something really cool about that.
Yeah, everyone has a GitHub account.
Everyone has a GitHub account. You have a great editor already. So we can talk more about that next episode.
I'm excited.
Cool. Was that enough for you to end on a positive note? Now I'm going to go outside of the pitch black, even though it's 4:30. Try not to kill myself on the way home.
What would happen if you just, like, we got a client in Alaska where it's just dark all day?
Move to Florida and become a citrus farmer.
Okay.
You got your answer.
There you go.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.